Okay, hello everyone. Welcome to this month's edition of Tequila. And again, we're doing a online presentation, and we're very thrilled to have two great presenters today from eBay Germany, Jan Eumann and Rohit Singhal. And they will talk about how they build and test software at eBay Germany. Sorry. Yeah, and one more thing. We're gonna have some Slido Q&A, so they're gonna also share the link for that. So yeah, please feel free to contribute and make it more interesting and more interactive during the talk. So without further ado, Jan.
Yeah.
Nice to have you.
Thank you.
Stage is all yours.
Yeah, thanks for having us. Yeah, welcome everybody. So yeah, my name is Jan, and Rohit will also talk about some parts later on. So let me start with a short story about actually this happened. So why are we here now? So there's something that that we do within eBay. So to send out a recommendation every Monday morning, so which was started by a former manager of mine, so Ilari. And so Rohit proposed this how they test page from Abhijit to me. So I sent it out, and we had a call a couple of days later with the team in Australia. And then I heard, well, Jan, do you know, he actually worked for eBay in the past. I said, no, I didn't know this. Thanks. And then I reached out to him. We talked, and yeah, he told me about the meetup that you are organizing. And so now we're here today. All right, so we're going to talk about how we build and test software at eBay.de. So what's really important to know is we talk about our team in Germany. So we are a small team within eBay, and we talk about how we work. So this is not about how eBay works in general. So it's about our team. So for Slido, you see the link at the bottom of the slide. So just go to slido.com, type in the ID, and once we have questions, so we will let you know again, and then you can answer some questions so that we have some interaction and we learn a little bit about you in the audience as well during the talk. So what we're gonna cover today is a little bit about our team structure, something that we call the embedded tester model. So how are the testers integrated into the team? And we're gonna talk about the test strategy that we use in our agile environment. So yeah, a little bit more about us. So Rohit, do you want to start?
Yeah, sure. So hi everyone, I'm Rohit, and thank you again for joining the session, that too on a Saturday. So you could have done a lot of different things as well. And thank you Tequila and Ministry of Testing for giving us this chance, to talk to you guys and present our session. So quick intro about me. I'm Rohit Singhal, and I have around 7 years of experience in testing domain. And I work across multiple companies and in multiple roles as well. I started at eBay in 2018, so I'll be completing almost 2 years now. And one thing for sure that I can say from my past experiences is that testing or quality assurance is not easy. And then you get to learn a lot on daily basis. So yeah, that's about me.
All right, thanks. So yeah, so for me, yeah, I'm at eBay since 9 years by now. So right now my role is the test engineering lead for our team in Germany. And also I'm the manager for the other QE people and testers in our team in Germany. So I'm actually Rohit's manager, but that shouldn't matter much for today. So before joining eBay, I started working in 2005, and I worked in different roles, and actually worked as a developer before, did rollout management roles. I mean, I was in a big waterfall project for a big German company for 7 years or so, and did all kind of different roles in that project. And since I joined eBay, I was doing exploratory testing. I was writing automation to do regression testing for the European sites. I coached test automation engineers in India back then. And yeah, since a couple of years, I'm the test engineering lead in Berlin. So before we start, so a couple of facts about eBay. So these are based on the numbers from Q1. So actually the GMV, so that's the amount of money that is being traded on eBay, was about 21 billion in Q1 in 2020. So if you break that down, that is roughly about $2,800 per second. So that's quite an impressive number. So I think this always helps to keep the scale of eBay in mind when you think about it. So if you work on something that is related to checkout, you should be careful, right? So if you stop the checkout for the whole world, it's going to be expensive pretty quickly. So there are about 1.5 billion live listings at the moment on eBay. And on the marketplaces worldwide, we have about 174 million active buyers. So that means that there are people who bought at least one item on eBay in the last year. So I hope we have a couple of eBay customers watching today as well. And maybe that's something that you wouldn't expect. So almost 80% of the items being sold on eBay are actually new and not used. So yeah, on the right side, you can see a couple of facts about what happens on the German marketplace. So for example, a smartphone is purchased every 16 seconds, which I think is quite an impressive number. If you want to see some more numbers, so there's the link at the bottom of the slide, or you can just go to ebayinc.com and look for the press room. So you're going to see some more statistics for other countries as well there. All right, so now that I talked about eBay in general a little bit, so I'm going to talk about the mission for our team. So we are called the Regional Development Team for Germany. And our task is to improve the experience for the customers, specifically in Germany. So for your understanding, so eBay in general is organized by domains. So you would have a team that is responsible for the homepage, for checkout, for search, and they are responsible for this experience worldwide. So that means they do take care of the experience for the customers across all the different marketplaces, so ebay.com, DE, and so on. So our role is a little bit different from that. So we look at the existing customer experience in DE, and there might be some differences in relation to what people expect for payment methods. So for example, bank transfer is a payment method that is still quite popular in Germany, and it might not be used much in the US. So our role would be then to work with the checkout team, for example, to help make that experience for the German customer better. But there might also be new experiences that we create specifically for Germany, because there's a need identified for this kind of feature, and then we might start in Germany. But if it's successful, it could be that a similar feature or a version of that might roll out worldwide as well. What's important also to know is that we work across all these different domains. So if we work on checkout, we work with the checkout team, we try to figure out a way of working. So how can we work together? How does their process look like? And then we try to integrate so that it makes sense for both teams to work together. So that also means that we can work across platforms. So for now, we mostly worked on web and mWeb. We have one mobile developer now in our team, and we're going to have a second one soon. So then we will also work on the native apps, and this might change the strategy or the approach as well. So what we're going to talk about today is mainly the strategy for web-based and mWeb-based applications. So with that, Rohit, anything that I forgot?
No, actually, you covered everything. So yeah, though we just started with Android and iOS development in our team, but before that, we were actually kind of testing what was coming to Germany. So if there were any changes to, like Jan said, to domain services, we were always there to test or support, from Germany, so that we can test things there as well. Okay, so this is what our current team structure looks like. So if you see this, we have a group of people. I think currently we have around 20 team members in Germany who are basically the engineering side of the team. And in that 20, we have head of engineering, product leads, data analysts, test engineers, and developers. If I talk about numbers, we have roughly 13 developers, I would say, and I think we have 4 quality engineers. So we call QEs our quality engineers, and rather than like different titles are there in the market or in different companies. But yeah, so this is our current team structure. Also, we are now turning on a poll on Slido. So if you go to this link and you will find a poll running, so you can also tell us about, how does your team structure look like, and we can then later on discuss the results as well and share the results with you guys. Okay, so moving ahead, Jan, can you go to the next slide? All right, so this is our team structure that we used to have in past. When I say past, it's like maybe somewhere in like early 2019 or maybe end of 2018. So in the past, when we started this regional development team in Germany, we were actually just a single team, like you see in the image, and we were working on multiple eBay domains and making changes as per the German market. As you can see in the image, you see like every role has got some overlapping responsibilities as well. So we were doing it so that everyone, gets a chance to pair and then have a better understanding of what other activities are going on the project. And this way, you also get a platform, where you can learn and share your learnings with the other person whom you're pairing with or working with, and to have a healthy culture in the team as well. Also, it makes sense, because we have seen most of the things that you do as a tester or a developer, or maybe in terms of thinking or skills, are kind of, significantly overlapping. So this helps us a lot to maintain if we have overlapping roles. And also, I read about some sayings from Ben Kelly, and he also proposes, these kind of models where, overlapping roles and responsibilities are always a good idea to have. And that's why we call this like an embedded tester model in the German development team. Okay, so now moving ahead. So this is now how our current team structure looks like. So I hope most of you are familiar of these kind of things, right? There are a lot of models that are running around. We call it work streams, but there are other terms like squads per project or per epic as well. So currently we have 3 squads running or 3 work streams running, where people work on a particular project. And why we came up with this approach was when we were using the previous approach that I shared, like a one big team and everyone working on like different projects, or maybe multiple projects running in the team. We faced kind of challenges when our team started growing big. So when we started this team, I guess there were like 5, 7, 10 people, but now, like I said, there are more than 20 people in the team. So we faced a lot of challenges with the previous team structure. So we thought, okay, let's maybe spend some time, think about it, and then come up with something where everyone can contribute and we have a dedicated focus. So we went ahead and opted with this current team model to have a dedicated focus for a particular project. And this also helps to run multiple parallel, small or big projects, that doesn't matter, but you can run parallel projects at the same time. And then every work stream has a mix of product owners, developers, testers, and again, they're all kind of sharing some responsibilities and pairing on stories or whatever tasks they do, right? So what this enables us is to have independent, dedicated, and focused teams on that particular project. And like I said, so this is not a real distribution, what you see, like 5, 6 devs to 1 tester. This is just for an example, but I hope you get the idea, like what we are trying to achieve with these kind of models. So yeah, I will hand over to Jan now.
So yeah, Rohit mentioned it already a little bit. So what we have something that we call an embedded tester model, and I see on the poll that actually we have about 50% of the people who participated in the poll who are also a tester in the development team. So maybe that will be sound familiar to you. But so what do we understand or so how do we understand this model and how do we make it work? So what's important in our case is that we actually see the test as being part of the team and actually right from the start. So when we have kickoff meetings, when we have brainstorming meetings about, okay, what could a new feature, a new project look like? So you can already be involved as a tester. So we had a couple of examples in the past where we had 2 QE people working closely with the business unit to define a strategy. Okay, how can we build this, and bringing in a lot of domain knowledge to achieve that. So, and you're really part of the team. That means you sit with the team, you work with the team directly, and we will get to this later a little bit as well. But so what we try to do is a lot of pairing. So you can pair with the developer. So we have a couple of QE people who actually also write production code. So I did this a couple of years ago so that I would take some stories, or would pair with the developer on writing production code as well. What we also see, what's a good fit usually for QE people, is to act as a bridge between the developers and the business or customer service. So to help to speak the languages of both worlds, right? So that might be the case that it's sometimes difficult to translate between a customer service request and what actually a developer needs to look into this issue and to fix it. So that by no means I want to say that there are no developers in the world who can do this. And we have quite a lot of developers in our team who are actually very capable of speaking the business language, maybe even more than I can. So, but in general, this is what we look for a tester that fits into our model. Like I said, pairing is important with the developer, between testers, pairing with the PM. So to maybe on grooming stories or working on a story, creating a draft for a user story. And another interesting part is actually the educate the team about testing. So for example, what I would have done, or what I did in the past, is pair with the developer, sit down, create a mind map together. Okay, how do we gonna test this user story? What are your ideas? And it's really fascinating often to see the kind of tools that a developer knows of or would use to test a specific feature. Sometimes it's really a great benefit then to work together and see, bring in technical tools from maybe from the developer side, or ideas that you could only really generate if you know the code, and also bring in the domain knowledge or the broader knowledge from a tester to and the customer view. So what we also do is, and actually what our whole team really likes, is do some kind of bug bashes where we sit down for an hour together in a room and we all test the feature together and come up with a list of issues and discuss them afterwards and see what can be fixed quickly. Maybe some things aren't even bugs or are not problems, and we can see what to do about that. And for example, what I did lately was to bring in a concept called risk storming. So you might have heard about it. So it's one of the inventors is Beren van Dalen. So he created this kind of risk storming approach. So it was based on a real card game where you have some cards and you discuss quality aspects with your team, and then you think about risks. But so there's an online version now as well. And if you Google for risk storming, there should be a session next week where they sit together and actually do risk storming for the Death Star, if I'm not mistaken. So if you Google this, you will probably find it. So yeah, on top of being a skilled and great exploratory tester, so some of the skills that we look out for is technical awareness. What I mean by that is, so you don't need to be a programmer. If we want to have another developer in our team, we would hire a developer. But of course, it is useful if you have, for example, if you have written code in the past yourself, if you can read code, if you have knowledge about database, if you have, for example, knowledge about proxy tools to use, if you test a mobile app. So there are all kind of different things that can play a role here. So it's not necessarily about writing code yourself, but being aware of processes, different technologies, so that can all help. When we started this embedded tester model, so we benefited for the testers that were there, so me and actually another colleague. So we had the benefit that we tested a lot of projects in the past that were developed for European countries. So we actually worked across all eBay domains in the past. So we had broader knowledge and we could help to bring, to look at the bigger picture and bring things into perspective. So for Rohit, for example, he joined 2 years ago, but he's very curious about the domain. So that's not a problem. So he builds up the domain knowledge, and he's supposed to ask a lot of questions then to learn about it. So which actually brings me to the last point. So what's definitely important in this role is to have the willingness to learn. So you need to update your knowledge. You have to learn about the domain. You have to develop a basic understanding of, okay, how does the development process look like? So what are the technologies that we use? And yeah, connect with different people from different departments to learn about what we're doing. Okay, to the next step. So I would go a little bit back and talk about, okay, what is testing for us? Or what you see on the slide is specifically what's testing for me. Rohit might add his perspective a little bit later as well. So for me, testing is really about providing information to stakeholders. So that information can be bugs that you found. It can be things that are actually working. It can be additional risks that you identified or concerns that you have. And stakeholders can be your developers in the team, right? So if you test a user story, a developer might be the stakeholder for you, and you inform him about, okay, this is what I see, what looks like it's working, and other things might be improved. So, or it can be the product owner. Of course, it's the customer. It can be customer service. A lot of different people can be the stakeholders for your testing. And in general, with the test, in my perspective, you're trying to answer questions about the product. So at the bottom of the slide, you can see, so there are two main sources, I think, from my perspective, which are lessons learned in software testing from Kim Kaner, James Bach, and Brad Petticoat, and Exploit by Elizabeth Hendrickson. So, and if you look at testing to be divided into two parts, like checking and exploring, this is from the Exploit book. And so the checking part I see is, okay, we can definitely write assertions for the expectations of the software of the known things, right? So we can look at, if we click this button, something should happen. If we know that, we can probably write a test for this. And for this part, yes, of course, automation is very useful. So we can use it here quite a lot. But there's also this part where you don't know what actually happens, right? So that's why you need exploring, in my perspective, as well. So this is where you uncover risks that you haven't thought about. This is where you put, for example, the experience that you're building into perspective with the greater eBay landscape, and see if it makes sense, actually. Yeah, and that's actually, so for this exploring part, so the format that I mentioned, the risk storming, is very, very useful to do it early on in a project. So Roy, do you want to add your perspective? I mean, I asked him in the interview as well. Let's see if he's consistent with what he said 2 years ago.
Yeah, let's see, I can repeat my answer. Okay, yeah. So like you said, so, test automation obviously helps you to, while you're checking things and when you know what is expected out of your software. But so in my personal opinion, actually, it's when I see test automation, I don't see automation just about, writing functional or end-to-end tests, or, limiting yourself to these kind of things. What I feel is it can be anything, it can be like a small thing or a very big thing, right? But it should actually help you to reduce manual efforts. And if you can do that by writing some code, that's like a win-win situation, right? So maybe for example, right, imagine if you are testing manually and you spend maybe 10, 20 or 30 seconds or maybe a minute, right, to create a test data where you maybe, for example, just want to create an account, because at eBay, if we are testing something manually, we might need to create an account. And for creating that account, we might need a user in Germany or in Singapore or in US, right? So, and say if you're spending a minute to do that, it's like you are wasting your manual energy and efforts, right? So you can automate something like that. You might build an API or maybe a chatbot or something like that, where you get all these things solved out. For me, that's also part of testing and part of automation. So yeah, that's my opinion on testing. Maybe, I hope I repeated my answer, Jan.
I guess it sounds familiar. Yeah, thanks. All right. So let's move to the next topic, which is about our agile approach. So, so I also want to mention Slido one more time. So there's, if you go to slido.com, and you enter this ID at the bottom of the slide, so 67270. So you will soon see a second poll. Oh, you see it already, so I see it, yeah. So please go there and take a look at the poll. And I also saw there are quite a lot of questions coming in on Slido, so we will definitely take a look at them when we come to the Q&A section. Okay, so yeah, as you can see, so what we are using as our agile approach at eBay is Kanban. So we don't have a fixed sprint rhythm or something. So we have basically a board that looks like this. So we have a column for ideas where we collect rough ideas about, okay, what could be a new feature, or what could also be also on the user story level, what could be a user story that we need to implement at some point. We have something, a column that's called backlog. So this is where we actually group the stories already together with the team. So, and that can potentially be picked up for development. We have a column in progress. And what's important here is that we actually do pairing in this column for sure. So this is the default way of working here. So it's rather that way that you explain why you're not pairing, and not the way that that you have to explain why you're pairing. And so the default mode should be pairing. So that can be two developers. This can be a tester and a developer, can even be a PM and a developer, or a PM and a tester. So it really depends on the user story. We have a column called awaiting acceptance. So this is where we take another look at the user story. We might do exploratory testing. It can be another person doing a code review. It can be the PM who will take a look at, okay, is a campaign configured in the right way or something like this. And we have a done column. So that means we have done the things that we wanted to do for the story. And yeah, those are ready to be released. So I will come back to the release questions in a couple of minutes. So when I said, so we don't have fixed sprints, so we also really do not do estimations. So our goal is that a story can move through the board on average in roughly 2 to 3 days. So that means from the backlog, in progress, awaiting acceptance to done. So that's the rough idea. So, and we take a look every couple of weeks or months at, okay, how close are we to this average? So of course, there are some user stories that might take longer, but there are also some that actually are pretty fast. But the idea is to have a fast turnaround and get things to done quickly. So, okay, about the release question. So once we have a set of stories and done, we would actually look at stories and the systems or the applications that are affected by these user stories, because it can be like a backend service, a front-end service, it can be across different domains. We would take a look at the stories and then decide, does it make sense to do a release now? And then we are pretty flexible on doing releases. So we can start a release actually whenever we want. And in general, I would say sometimes we do daily releases, sometimes we have only one per week, sometimes we might have a week without a release, but so we're really flexible on this kind of part on releasing. Of course, it's slightly different if we work with partner teams, like for example, like I mentioned, Checkout. So they might have a different rhythm and a fixed release schedule. So we need to work with them upfront to make sure that it fits for them as well. Rohit, anything you want to add here for the release part?
No, actually, maybe I could add like one more thing. So usually what we also try to do is we make our stories in such a way so that they're testable. So, we try to make stories small so that each chunk is testable independently. We try to do it. Maybe in some situations, it's not really possible. So, exceptions always are there. But because we try to make everything testable, and we also try to put in a lot of details in that stories as well. When I say details, I mean like, what is the acceptance criteria, and it should be like a clear-cut acceptance criteria which is testable at the end. And then while story moves from say in progress to awaiting acceptance, like Jan mentioned, where anyone in the team can actually test, we also try to pair up with developers so that we also understand what kind of coverage they have, if some new unit tests have been added or have been modified, or if they've covered integration tests, or which kind of things or features or areas it could impact, so that we could also monitor. So it kind of gives the person who's testing, maybe a QE, maybe a dev, so it kind of gives a little confidence as well, that okay, once we push this code to staging or whichever branch we are on, we don't have to again go back and then validate the acceptance criteria.
So yeah, one more thing that when I said we don't do estimations, so what we do is we look at the story, is it small enough already, right? So because what I said is we want to be able to move it through the board in 2 to 3 days. So that's the criteria that we look at from an estimation perspective, right? We look at, is it already small enough, or can we split it in a way to make it smaller? So another important question, so when do we test? So I would say actually in all of these columns. So for ideas and backlog, the risk storming that I mentioned is a great approach to uncover risk with the whole team actually. So there you bring together ideally the business people, marketing, if you can, customer service, your PM, your developers, and your testers to discover things. From the transition from ideas to backlog, so we have a grooming with the whole team. And actually we look at the story and see, okay, we write down the acceptance criteria, we think about, have we forgotten something? Is there something we need to add? And like Rohit mentioned, we will also look at, is there something that we need to do for testability? And for example, we built, that was also mentioned by Rohit, we built internal tools to do this. So we have some things that make it easy for us to enter a user ID, and then you get some information about the programs that eBay customer might be subscribed to in the test environment or so that we can actually make the testing easier. So this would be something that we do here as well. Yeah, I believe that when developers are programming something or a pair is working on something, they do a lot of testing as well. They uncover unknowns, they look at things they haven't thought of. And of course, the pair working on a story, in our case, is supposed to write all the test automation that we need for this user story. So it can be unit testing, integration testing. It can also be adjusting the front end, end-to-end tests, or the end-to-end tests that we have in general for the project. In awaiting acceptance, there's another important thing to how we approach it. So everybody or any person in the team who's free is supposed to take up a task for testing, right? So if the testers in the team are busy, then it's completely normal that the developer who is currently free and not pairing on another story to pick up a story to do the exploratory testing for this. So in the beginning, like I said, so we did a lot of pairing sessions with developers to help them understand what kind of testing is needed. But what also helps here is the fact that Rohit mentioned that we keep the stories small. So it's not like you're probably going to spend 3 or 4 days testing a user story. It's rather a couple of hours. And then, for example, we are always there from the test team to answer questions or to give feedback on what could be tested as well. And then in the next stand-up, we might quickly talk about, okay, what did you do for testing? Is there anything else we can think of? And that's the way we approach it. But we also do testing, right? So when stories are already done. So I said that we look at a good chunk of stories that can be released together. And what we usually do then is to take a quick look again at, okay, what are the changes in these stories? Maybe we can do a quick regression test based on the risk that we see related to these stories. But for example, if we only change something in the backend that affects the content, we might not do a cross-browser test because it might not be the right thing to do in this case. And also we have monitoring and alerts set up in production because yes, we can do a lot of testing, but you will never find every bug that you might have in your system. So we have monitoring and alerts to actually see once we release to production to see how our features are doing. One more thing that I wanted to say about the releases, for every release, our strategy might also be different of how we release. So we in our team, we actually do the releases. So in the past, I actually did quite a lot of releases myself, then together with the developer. And then we would look at, okay, do we need to release the backend first, the front end first? Do we want to release to one instance alone and then check carefully on this one? For some features, we have feature toggles so that we say, okay, we roll it out, and then we switch it on, or sometimes we also have ramp up strategies so that we say, okay, we start with 1% of the traffic and then we slowly ramp it up. So there are lots of different approaches that we can pick. And I would say we look at the thing or the stories, the features that we are actually releasing, and then decide on the release strategy. All right. So yeah, and then there's another important question about, so how do we try to understand if we're actually building the right thing? So in our team, we now have a data analyst who's actually, you could consider the product data analyst. So he's really part of our team as well. He's working across the different streams that Rohit mentioned, but he has a lot of understanding of what is going on. So we try to work with him upfront to actually define metrics. How can we actually measure this feature that we're going to release? How can we make sure that we understand if we're going in the right direction? So there's a lot of close collaboration. And it's very similar to the embedded tester model. So the idea is to be part of the team, to be close to the team, to understand what we are doing in detail, and also apply an exploratory mindset. So maybe we ask about something, we do something, but then the data analyst in our team can help us to understand, oh, you might forget something very important here, or it's really difficult to measure, so that we need to enhance our tracking capabilities for a feature or for a project. All right, Rohit, anything to add?
No, I think you covered most of the things. I would just add one thing where we also do a lot of A/B tests, and with that A/B test, we actually have control groups and the groups that we're trying on these new features. So like Jan said, so we have staged rollout as well, and then A/B test. So even if something goes wrong in production, we can really control that via experiments, and also because everything is behind a toggle, so we could just switch it off if anything goes wrong in production. So that helps us a lot because we keep on monitoring after the release, so that helps us a lot. If anything goes wrong, we can quickly turn around and give a hot fix or something like that.
So, okay, then I will hand over to Rohit again to look at the test strategy for an example system architecture. I think we're about 40 minutes in, so.
Yeah, thanks, and I'll try to be a little faster so that at least we can cover everything. But because anyways, we want to have some time to discuss Q&As as well. So let's talk about how our test strategy is. And when I say test strategy, that doesn't mean that we do it for every feature that we work upon or every project that we work upon, and also might be different for other teams at eBay. So this is what we try to do in Germany, but this could be a little different for other teams across eBay. So if you think about a simple system architecture, right, you will have front end, you will have backend, and then obviously your consumers will be using a browser or maybe a native client like iOS or Android to use your application. And when I say backend, nowadays a lot of services, which we call domain services, are your core logic will be talking to like multiple backend services, and then will be serving to your front end, and then the front end will be serving to the consumers, right? We call these services as experience services. So our front end will have like an experience service, which will basically fulfill all the needs that different clients will have. So for example, if a user is an Android, then a single experience service can actually fulfill what we need to show on Android or iOS, and similarly for web and mobile web. So when I say like the experience service, it basically calls all the domain services and then aggregates data that is required for other parts of the system to work upon. For us, this might include experimentation. Like we said earlier, we try to do a lot of A/B tests as well. This might also include localization, because eBay is present in a lot of countries, I would say. And for example, in Germany, we have German language, so we might need to do some localization for our things. And second and most importantly, these experience services basically transforms the aggregated data uh, to simple and small JSON chunks, which can directly map to UI. So, the goal is to have like a single output, which can be directly consumed without having much processing or other service calls going to, downstream services like service A, B, C, and so on. So I would say the important part of your test strategy is to look at the system as a whole, like the integration of every smaller unit, but also look at each unit individually, like for example, backend, front end, what happens if you have backend with multiple service calls, but what happens if you mock your backend or mock your front end, things like that. So it's really important to test individual parts as well. So I'm going to talk about what we do for all individual parts, and then whole as for the system. So yeah, if you go to the next slide. All right, so if I talk about just backend, so imagine your team or you're working on a core logic of something, right? So you will try to put your business logic in that place. You will also think about performance of that particular piece of code and how is that happening, because that might be used by your front end or maybe other APIs, right? And then the important part is also error handling, because what happens if your logic fails, or if our one logic fails, and then what happened to other systems in the part, right? So that's really important. So for that, we try to cover a lot of unit tests and component tests with mocked domain services. So when I say domain services, in the previous example, if you saw service A, service B, and so on, these are basically the domain services that we have. So what we also try to do is write a lot of component tests so that we cover that part. And then obviously stress test and static code analysis. Stress tests are important because you want to, for us, we are serving millions of consumers, right? And load and performance things are really important for us. If something goes wrong there, obviously nobody will like the site, right? And you really need to provide, like for example, search results in quick seconds, so that people can actually use your website like without any hassle or without any bug, right? So that kind of things we focus on backend. Jan, if you go to the next slide. I will be going a little fast because we have just 15 minutes roughly remaining. So on the front end, the most important thing is rendering, how your front end will render to your clients. Then the behavior, like what happens if your backend is not responding. You would not like to show 404 to your consumers. Even if our system fails, we would try to have like a proper failure message rather than showing this page is not available, something like that. And then, like I said, error handling is really important. So again, for that, for front end, we have unit tests, we have component tests where we mock all the backend responses so that you can test front end alone rather than depending upon backend. And then obviously static code analysis, which is really important for us. Okay, let's move ahead. Now the next important chunk is, after you have tested your backend, it's really important to test backend with your downstream services, with like multiple domain services. So why it helps is because like Jan and we said in the earlier slides, that we are just one part of the system, where I say we our team. So other teams might be working on other domains of the system, and they might bring some change which we might not be aware of, or maybe we are not consuming that, and that could make our feature fail. So for that, it's really important to have test these pieces of systems in like integration as well. So for that, we, like I said, integration testing is really important for us to see how things are behaving when we integrate downstream service with our backend. And for that, we write contract tests as well, that, okay, service A should behave in this way, and we expect this kind of contract from service A to respond to us. So that we cover. And then again, load and performance and resilience testing, because of the size of the consumers that we are serving. And it's really important to have site running and giving proper responses to every consumer so that they have like a full-fledged and undisturbable user experience. Okay, moving ahead. Now this might look a little familiar because we try to do a lot of things with Selenium and different tools with that, but we also mock here backend so that we could actually check the end-to-end flow. But if something, so why we do that is also because now you know what to expect, so you can avoid flakiness in your end-to-end test. You can have you can have multiple tests, but with less maintenance overhead because you have mocked your backend, right? So you might not see a lot of flakiness. Also, we try to cover like the happy parts so that we know that what is expected of the system is working correctly before we roll it out to production. And also if JavaScript works across browsers, because we have observed sometimes when everything is working fine on Chrome, but suddenly something goes wrong on Firefox. And also we can test here the page speed and performance of different pages or things we are serving to the browser. So for that, we also do a lot of accessibility testing. I will give you one example where I faced that accessibility testing is really important. Even if you are not thinking about it, I would recommend accessibility is really important. I will talk about that example later on because I think we are still short on time. Okay, now moving ahead to the last part of it, which is testing end to end. So this part, because we have covered a lot of things in smaller parts of the system, we try to keep as less as possible our end-to-end test suite. And why we do that is because first, if you just think about this system, right? You have a lot of services like the domain services configured to your backend, and then backend will serve your frontend, and then you will have frontend serving your different clients, right? It's really hard to maintain a test suite which is not flaky and where you then don't get maintenance overhead. So at least we tried this doing like having a lot of tests in a test suite, but then we saw these things come later where you have to maintain a lot. So we thought, okay, why not we just reduce our end-to-end test suite and have just things which are necessary for us. And we test the integration. We don't focus on now what happens if things change at backend, because we have already covered in the unit test integration test there. Here we cover, like Jan mentioned, about risk-based analysis. So before kicking off a project, we already know what parts of the system could go wrong. So in here, we try to focus on those parts. We try to have visual testing as much as possible. We have a lot of security tests running because that's really important. And when I talk about security tests, it's not that we cover only in end-to-end phase, but whenever we start writing some backend API or changing things, we have a process to always go with where we cover security and everything related to security. So this is just to check if everything is working fine. Again, accessibility test to test if the whole system is working as expected, and people with different abilities are able to use system in the way we as a normal consumer we use. And also internal tools to support testing. So we develop a lot of tools and not just us, but other teams at eBay as well. And that helps us to quickly test things that we want to do in end-to-end. So yeah, Jan, maybe if I missed something and you want to add there.
No, I think it's fine. So for the internal tools, so there's just one thing that I found really useful in the past is if you have an idea. So for example, I wanted to have a service that creates test data, because before we had test data creation capabilities built into the test automation framework that's widely used at eBay, but then you always had to use Java to create the test data, right? So you had to do it from IntelliJ or whatever kind of tool you want to use. So I wanted to have a service, a REST service that you can call with Postman or any other tool or from the command line, so that you can use. So I worked with a couple of developers on this, and the advantage or the thing that made it very useful for the developers was, so they were free to experiment with new technologies, new tools, and that made a service that was from the logic also not very interesting. It made it interesting for them to work with me on this. So that was just an advice. So if you have an idea, maybe reach out to developers in your team and let them choose the technology, let them learn about new technologies, new tools, and maybe you can create something nice together. Yeah, so just a quick pipeline example. So for example, for a backend service, yeah, after a commit in Git, so we would check out, we would build and run the unit tests, we would package the manifest, which is basically the build that will be installed. First, we're going to install to an internal test environment, so that's called a feature pool. So that's dedicated more or less to our team. Other people can access it, but it's not integrated into the central test environment within eBay. So we would run some contract or integration tests against that. And then if those are okay, we deploy to the central staging environment. And also to an environment called pre-production, so where we have data that is closer to the production data, so that we can actually see that features are working well with realistic data. For the front end, it looks pretty much the same. So check out building and unit testing, building the manifest, deploying to these internal feature pools, so the internal test environment, run some acceptance tests, and if that's all fine, we deploy to staging, because we don't want to deploy something to staging that is, I mean, those acceptance tests might be only a handful of tests, right, to make sure that the page is working, that the basic and most important things are there. And then we deploy to the central test environment and to the pre-production environment. So Roy talked about accessibility and security tests and so on. So those are not necessarily part of the pipeline. And so this is also an example. So it might look different from project to project a little bit, but so overall, I would say this is the goal or the idea that we want to achieve with our pipelines. All right, so yeah, as a summary for the test strategy, yeah, the strategy of course depends on the context. And like we said in the beginning, we will start working more on native apps, and we will probably have to adjust our strategy there. Right? So this will not look the same. So what we see is that automated checks and exploratory testing complement each other. So this is very important. So we actually automate things to have more time for exploratory testing. Our goal is not to get rid of people who do manual or exploratory testing. So this is a very useful skill in our opinion, right? To uncover things that we haven't thought of, right? So to find out risk. So this is important from my perspective to keep in mind. Yeah, for the automated checks, many low-level tests, fewer end-to-end tests. So, and yeah, we really try to apply exploratory approaches continuously. So that's an important thing. And you will see on the next slide in the sources or in reading tips. So this is heavily influenced by Dan Ashby, who used to work for eBay as well for a while. And we mentioned this, building tools to increase testability, to make testing easier is very, very important, especially as well, in my opinion. If you want to get developers to do more testing, it shouldn't be hard to create test data. If it's just sending a command or two to a Slack bot and then you get your user and your item, that's something that people really like, and that's when they do a lot of testing. So anything from your side, Rohit, as a summary?
First things first, we have a new poll running on Slido. So I missed saying that. So if you could just go to that link, you will see a new question there, and you know, share your thoughts there. Yep. Like you said, we try to cover as much as possible at lower levels. So we really don't want to have too much test at end-to-end level, because like I told you, it's flaky, and then it brings a lot of maintenance as well. And also when we say staging environments, these are environments which are you know, there for our German market. So it's not, so I think I read one of the questions as well, that you know, about how do you test on staging, and how do you you know, when the code goes to staging environments. So we have staging environments for different geographies. So for that, basically that helps us to test only our part of the system and not like what other teams are doing. So that's also a good thing that we have at eBay to test on staging before going to production.
Okay, so yeah, sources and learn more. So I mentioned these 2 excellent books already. So if you haven't read them, I highly recommend that. So especially the Lessons Learned in Software Testing is a book that I pick up again and again. And depending on my role at that moment or the context that I'm in, so some of the lessons are really, really helpful again and again, or in a different way. So I can really recommend that. And yeah, here's a long list of other things that you can take a look at. I think we will share the slides afterwards, and then you can go through the links yourself. All right. Yeah, thank you very much. I see that there are a lot of questions, so I'm happy to spend more than a minute now to go through some of the questions. So I don't know, for the organizers, what do you think? What should we do?
Yeah, I think we can spend some more time. No problem.
Okay. So do you have some questions on YouTube? Because I see a lot of on Slido. So I would go from top to bottom on Slido then.
Yeah, I think we can go with the Slido questions.
Okay. So the most popular question is, you say tests should provide information. What are your criteria for this, and how do you decide which regression tests to remove when they stop being useful? Yeah, that's a very good question. So well, what do we answer for this? So we usually, what we don't do is that we create a list of for the parts that we own. We don't create a list of test cases with very detailed steps. So what we would do is higher level test ideas, and then fill them with as much information as we need for this. And yeah, then of course, I mean, if we see that some of those things don't apply anymore because we changed the feature, then we would go and adjust the test ideas. But the goal would in general be to have less documentation in a written form, but more knowledge within the team. So that's why I think the embedded tester part is important for us, right? So you need to be part of the team and you have the knowledge within the team. I'm not sure if I answer this question in a good way. I might need to think a bit more about it, but Rohit, maybe you can give it a try as well.
Yeah, I can try that. It's a difficult one, but it's a good question. So I would not agree, that we don't have a lot of documentation which is useful. So I also have seen, not just at current company, but at previous companies as well. But the change that we did in our team is we try to document not to a greater detail. We try to document, say, if we are talking about subscription, we will try to document if you have a new user, if you have an expired user, if you have a paid user or a non-paid user, something like that on a higher level, right? And also because we try not to document like in details. Whenever something changes, let's say tomorrow we build a feature on top of that, it's easy for us to modify that. So, and it's also as a tester, it's sometimes it's really messy to look at a document which is super big. So we try to we try to document it high level and then clean up a bit later as well. And if we try to go into much detail, even I would not prefer cleaning it up later on at the stage. So that's what we try to do.
So I think the next question is a good one for you about mobile testing. So do you have it in front of you as well, the Slido question?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah, so I will just repeat the question first. So the question says, asking about mobile testing, how much manual testing you perform, and what tool do you use to monitor the network? Okay, I can, so like we said, we haven't done a much of development and testing on the native side at eBay, but I can talk about my previous experiences where we did mobile testing and what we were doing. So when you say manual testing, I would say it's always the case, right? So even if you automate like 100%, I don't know if 100% is correct or not, but still you would like to do some manual tests before you go to production, right? So even at eBay, we do manual testing. And if you say how much, I would say normally we try to cover P1 and P2 cases, where we won't go, like I said, into all features, but at least per feature we will validate P1, P2 cases so that we know we have covered much from the manual side. And about tools, I'm not sure like what is expected out of this answer, because what tool do you use to monitor the network? In my previous at least I'm not sure about eBay, like what they're using, but in my previous experiences we were just using some open source tools to monitor the network, and also we were controlling it sometimes via browser. Like on the browser you can say 3G, 4G and speeds like that, and there are a lot of open source tools with which you can control your network speed, if that's what the question is about.
Okay, thanks. So yeah, the next one is about how do you measure test coverage for every feature you release? So I mean, there are different dimensions to this, I would say. So of course we look at code coverage. So using popular tools to measure code coverage for unit tests and integration tests. That's one part. But of course, I mean, even if you have 100% code coverage, that doesn't mean that the application does anything that's useful for the customer. And you can also write tests in a way that even if they cover all parts of your code or all the lines of your code, it might still not check the right things. So I don't know if this question is also meant for exploratory testing or in general. So like we said before, so we like to create something like mind maps or test ideas. And then of course we can look at, okay, how much of that have we tested? So that would be some approach to have a table in a wiki where we list the different test ideas or scenarios you want to test, the different experiences that are relevant. And then we mark it as, okay, green if everything looks good, and maybe yellow if we still have concerns or stories that need to follow, or red if they are blocking bugs. Something like this could be an answer for this, I guess. So the next one from Martin again. Oh, then something changed in the order, but okay, from the next one from Martin. Taking shared responsibilities to the extreme, do you think the distinction between software engineers and quality engineers will remain relevant in the future? Excellent question again. So I would say, so it is important to have someone in the team who thinks, so who has the mindset to think critically about the software, to keep in mind that there are things we might not know yet. So for me, it doesn't necessarily have to be, or has to be, someone with the title quality engineer or tester. But I would also say it's quite difficult to be building something and having the same critical mindset to the application you're building. I know this from myself. When I was a developer, you're trying to build something. So you try to find a solution to solve a problem. And if you're a tester, you have a mindset where you actually think about, okay, what do we miss? What can go wrong? Of course, if you're a good developer, you apply already this thinking as well, but it's quite difficult. And in my opinion, at the moment, I like to have these different roles to make clear that we have these different mindsets that we want to have in the team. But as I said, so the testers in our team, so they're flexible. So if they like to write production code, I'm happy to support them there, or the team is happy to support them. So you can do pairing with developers, you can learn about it, and you can still do this. So there is quite an overlap, but I think it's important to have someone who keeps that in mind. Okay, so there's one question that moved up, so which is about how do you enable developers to do exploratory testing while pairing? So I would first look at how do you enable developers to do exploratory testing, and then also look at while pairing. So there are a couple of things that we mentioned. So I think it's important for developers to understand that testing is not about going through a list of detailed steps and just say, yes, I logged in with this user. Yes, this worked, this worked, this worked. So if you can bring the point across that exploratory testing is about learning, about uncovering new things, I think it's quite likely that people understand that this is actually fun and that they like to do it. So for one example is I did an exploratory testing challenge with the team and then said, okay, here's an application. You don't know anything about it. Here's the link, go and test it and find bugs. And people really enjoyed it. I think this is something that it's important to bring across, that this can be fun. Another point is that what we mentioned, that it should be easy to create test data, right? So you shouldn't spend an hour to create a user to do a test that will maybe take only a minute and you might not find something. So this is something, if it's easy to create a user, if it's easy to create another one, if it's easy to repeat something, then people are more likely to do it. So investing in these kind of tools, in my perspective, will also help to enable developers to do the exploratory testing. For the pairing part, I think it's also useful to see this if you combine your ideas on test ideas, so you can work something out together, and you might have an idea and the developer might have another idea on what you can do for testing, and then combined, you might achieve a better coverage, or you have great ideas that actually influence each other. Rohit, anything?
Yeah, I can add a couple of points there. So one is we also do a lot of bug bashes. So, and one thing that we changed in or while doing our bug bashes is we don't tell everyone all the details about the feature. We just say, okay, this is the feature, this is the test data, or this is the environment that you need to test on. And then that actually brings a lot of useful scenarios that people run, right? Because if you tell them like, okay, these are the expected things that we're looking for, maybe everyone will not have that kind of mindset. So that one thing that we changed. The second thing, like I said earlier, we try to keep the stories smaller. And when I say stories smaller, we also pair with PMs and devs while writing stories. And while we are writing stories, we try to put in as much as acceptance criteria, which in terms of sometimes are exploratory testing acceptance criteria as well, where you say, oh, if you have you handled the error cases, something like have you tested on, say, mobile, this feature. So once the developer is ready with those kind of features, they already have taken a look into some of these kinds, right? And even if not, then once we pair with them to see the story is done or not, we also sometimes educate these kind of things to the person we are working with.
So, question to the organizers, do we have more time? So there's one question that moved up now.
Yeah,
do you perform any testing on production? So
yeah, I think it's a good question. So maybe we can take one last.
yeah,
if you want to close with this one. Yeah.
Yeah, then we close with this one, and we will think about a way to answer the other ones. So maybe, I don't know if we can do it on Slido and provide a quick answer there. We will see. So, but we will try to find a way to or create a Google Doc and we write an answer down there and we share it with the people.
We can definitely share this with the group here. That would be great.
Yeah. This sounds like a great idea. Yes, we perform testing in production. So I mean, of course, after a release, we would do some smoke testing, like I mentioned. So we can, for example, start with one instance of a server with a backend, right? And then I can use Postman or any other tool and make a call and see that actually the production data is like I expect. Or I can take one instance of the front end out of the traffic and deploy there already and take a look from a user perspective. So this is some part that we do. And I also mentioned this pre-production environment, which is using more realistic production data. So that's something that's only visible to eBay internally. But there, for example, we already have the new versions of also other services that we depend on. And then we can test, okay, if we would roll out now with the services that we depend on, is everything looking fine? Good.
Yeah. Also, we have some automated tests that runs on production to validate very basic cases on our features. So yeah, we have some automated coverage and we do testing on production.
Okay, thank you very much. It was a really insightful presentation. I think also the feedback that we saw on YouTube is very positive. So guys have been enjoying it quite a bit. Yeah, sorry for overrunning by a bit, but I think it was very interesting to do the Q&A as well. And as Jan already mentioned, we will try to find a way to share responses to all the questions we didn't have time to cover in some other form with you guys. So yeah, we'll update you on the usual channels on Facebook, give you updates on this. So yeah.
So just as a note,
sorry.
so I'm not sure if we're gonna be able to do this today to answer all the questions, but for sure in the next couple of days, because I might be a bit tired now after this.
Sure, no worries. There's absolutely no rush with this, but we will follow up. Yeah, once we have that ready. Yeah, so thanks again. Thank you very much to Jan and Rohit for the great presentation. Also, shout out to eBay Germany and to our partners, Ministry of Testing, and to sponsor Applitools. There is no date yet for the next webinar. And again, we're going to update on Facebook about that. And yeah, thanks again, everyone, for your time, everyone for joining, and see you next time. Thank you.
Thank you very much.